everyone. Welcome to another episode of Talking Force. Today we have a very special guest today in Jose Catano. He's going to talk about his journey as, an athlete, as a coach, but then also coming to the United States and building what is arguably one of the top performance facilities here in the Northeast. So without further ado, Jose, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys for the invite. I mean, I'm really happy to be part of this group, and then thank you for the invite to get me here.
Yeah, and today, we're going to talk about my two favorite things. And for people who don't know, it's strength and conditioning and the beautiful country of Colombia.
Yes,
I
sir.
think I think your story is unique, but also is a major driver of why you've been so successful, not only in your business practice, but then also too in building the relationships with your athletes and helping them get to the next level. So if you could just kind of walk us through kind of your journey as an athlete and that moment that you got bit by the iron bug where you said, wow, this training's pretty cool. And not only do I have to build a career, you actually, came to the United States from a country that, many people don't know about, and they don't know that culture, and they don't know how that culture can actually be pretty helpful in building the kind of community that you've built here at your facility.
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, I'm from Girardota, so it's like a town like 30 minutes from Medellin, Colombia. So me growing up, I always been an athlete. My main sport is BMX racing. Here in the U.S. was big in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, but I mean it's not football, it's not baseball, so it's very overseen. Like not a lot of people know about it, but in Colombia was a main sport. I grew up racing from like 10 years old all the way right before I came here. And then going to school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to be in some sport. I like the ambient of like athletics. So in Colombia, it was either it's not like here, which is so good about this country is the opportunities that people have to do different sports. In Colombia, in my high school, I had soccer and I had track. That's it. There was nothing in between. I went to a private school, so all the kids there more likely were soccer players. I think I was the only kid. There were 5 kids in the entire school who did BMX racing competitively. So other than that, everybody played soccer. So at one point, my scoring, my grades for phys ed was me going to BMX races because I was. And then after that, I had an injury in like 2000. I got maybe 2003 ACL injury on a crash. So then I could not touch a field after that because I was now racing for nationals. I was a national ranked. I had a few international podiums, then regional titles as well. So it was like I was serious about it. So I couldn't mess with that. And then my mom had moved to this country when I was in 6th grade, and I wasn't able to see her until I graduated from high school. So part of that, I have like plan A, I go to the US, if with my mom can legalize her status, or plan B, I stay in Colombia, continue my BMX career, and go to university and do some athletics stuff. I think it was like sport management they had. So that's kind of what led to be here. My mom legalized her situation. I was able to see her after like 6 years, and then came to the US, but I came to Boston. So Boston and BMX. I wanted to also continue BMX here in the US. That was my dream. I was like, I came to the biggest storm in January. I'm like, this is not it. So it's like, this is not it. And then I had just to figure out, being an immigrant in a new country, and I just had to figure out life. Yeah.
We talk about strength and conditioning has a pretty set path in the United States. Usually, you go to college, you get an undergraduate degree. We have the NSCA certification, and then maybe you do an internship or a mentorship, and then you follow up with a master's program. I know that in Colombia, it's different. So the hierarchy and structures of the universities are different. And also, too, as you mentioned, the club structures of soccer to
Yeah.
these other
Everything
programs.
was clubs. Everything is clubs
Could you
in
explain
Colombia.
that to people? Because I think they sometimes we don't understand our clubs the way that we think of it in our system versus down there is a lot different, especially as it related to soccer. Because I think again, it's a very unique situation in Latin America.
Yeah, so pretty much, I mean, the way that it was in Colombia is um, like Colombia will have at least I can talk only at least for my school. They will have I don't even know if I had basketball, to be honest with you. I don't think people will play basketball for my school. So pretty much, if you want to be in athletics, which I don't even know how I graduated from high school, to put it first of all. So I'm gonna tell you first. First, schools. For my senior year, I was seeing 21 subjects per week. Put that into perspective. Here in the US, you graduate with about 21 subjects from let's say ninth grade to 12th grade. I was seeing that in 11th. We only have 11 years over there of high school. So I had 11 subjects per week. And as soon as 3 o'clock hits, everybody goes into their club. So if you like soccer, if you like volleyball, track and field, basketball, so all the sports school here in the US will provide, they have to be paid or sponsor, or there's a national level team or club. That's where you play for, and that's how you will compete. Sometimes they had intercollegiate, I think, or collegiate like tournaments, kind of like you know this town playing against that town. They will have for certain sports, but soccer was the main one. They will have for BMX was a big one too. But I can't even remember any of my friends playing basketball that didn't play club. So that's the number one thing. So it was Monday to Friday, 3 to 7, 3 to 8, kind of like it is here, but there's not high school tournaments or teams.
Yeah, and I think when we think about our sports, we have towns and cities that don't have professional teams, so the
Hmm.
college can be the focal point. But for listeners who don't know, and I got to ask you this question, Medellin or Nacional, like the two different soccer programs down there, this is a rivalry of the Red Sox and the Yankees on
But
steroids.
it's like 10
It's
times 10. It's like, yeah, but people don't understand. I mean, like, when it comes to soccer fans, it's insane. I mean, soccer is one of the biggest sports in the world. But they take it too hard. They take it hard. Also, there's not many options to do. You know what I mean? Soccer is the cheapest sport that you can play. My friends used to play in a in a dirt field with on shoes or not shoes, which is why the most developed athletes now in the league come from these third world countries, because now that I learned that is the ability to be on different scenarios. Like, you play soccer, yes, but you play soccer on field. You play soccer on grass. You're playing soccer on mud. You're playing on uneven surface. That's development right there. Like, that's the first like the sports like specifics. But then you're doing it on different surfaces. Once you start working with different surfaces, the interaction with the ground becomes different. You start to learn different deceleration techniques, footwork skills, jumping, running, acceleration. That's what gets you to the next level. That's why, like, early specialization is bad. But what they don't realize, for some of these athletes, they started playing on very harsh conditions. So by the time they came to the league, were perfect ground, perfect ball, you know what I mean, with rules. And like, I remember my friends, we used to play in high school. There were no rules. It was concrete, uneven concrete, one goal, 20 against 20. And if you got megged, you're out. Like, that was but part of that is like they have like the development programs that they will have here. A big one we have universities, but we don't have dorms. Like, as far as I know, there's no dorms. We don't have. I never heard of college athletics. So it's like you go to college, but after that you go to club. So it's like down like that. Like, the only people that will commute to the school, like leave, will be people from other states. They will come, get an apartment, and then they will go to school. So in Medellin, there might be what, 30 universities? I don't even know. Just because it's very like you stay home, you commute, you go to the club. People don't work as well. That's a huge one. Like, I started to work when I came to this country. So that was the part that is so different. And when you said that, what got me into this industry was the environment. That was number one. The ways I was raised as an athlete, and when I started working here, I didn't. When I started working here, thank God I never worked in the industry of sales. Not I mean, everybody comes here, McDonald's, Market Basket, like all these, like a retail store. I started here volunteering with this school district, and I started working at the YMCA. And then after, like, seeing all that, is like, I like this environment. I didn't even know I was working with kids, and I'm actually amazing. And that led me to to like being more okay. I want to work with kids. I want to work with these groups. I want to be athletic. I want to do this. What can I do? So then I started going into education, and but I also like that athletics. So I was like, okay, maybe I do both. So I started doing special ed because now I got a position for the school district, and I was working on a program for autism and Asperger's. But then I also want to keep the athleticism. And then after 2 years, I started working into BMX. So now I started now competing national rank for BMX, a few sponsors, and that led to the next level as well.
So you bring up a great point there, and throughout our journey, when we're learning the science, there's very hard sciences, but the point that you brought up right there about there's also an emotional side. There's a commitment, a passion. When you coach, you have to do it with passion, and you have to build relationships. And often, we'll talk to people in a time of data, dashboards, analytics. I think sometimes the personal element gets forgotten. How much do you think that helped or hurt you doing this non-traditional path of where you didn't know the American structure, you didn't college university structures were kind of foreign, but then when you came here and you got to see it from your own perspective, but still taking that kind of club mentality, serious clubs, to your training practice, how much do you think that impacted you?
No, I mean it was huge. I was like, to be honest with you, when I started working into the industry, I was like, I can really truly say I was teaching and coaching with rocks and sticks. Like that's how raw I had it. The good thing, for example, that helped me is my personality. Like I'm very chill, get my point across. And also part of the psychology of me working as a behavior specialist, working with kids, started with autism and Asperger's, now to working with kids with PTSD, ODD, ADD, ADHD, all the letters in the alphabet you can label a condition like I worked with. So that also allowed me that. I think that's why like I brought the behavior specialist, the behavior aspect of human development into coaching. How do you talk to your athletes? How do you want arousal to be? How you want to get your point across? That communication part, which I think is very unique and one of a kind, on how do you want a program to be and the expectations that you get from an athlete on the behavior side. And also because I had this background of what people, if you have PTSD, there's certain things that you have to go through. If you have ADHD, there's certain things, the way that you got to manipulate the information or the way that you present it to an athlete. If you have an athlete with, and that happens a lot, is ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. That has no cure, but there's a way to manage it. So these are like more likely the athletes that are very stubborn. And if you say is white, I'm gonna say is gray. You know what I mean? Or like that's one of the part what these would be considered the bad athletes in a way, because they're not coachable.
Well, could you just, I think that's worth explaining a little bit more because I know you covered a lot there. Walk
Yeah,
through that again, that structure and framework, because what you just said, we see this often, and I know exactly what you're talking about in our practice, where let's just call it resistance, and
yeah,
whether it's to the authority, to the data, to the information, walk through again that kind of profile, but then walk us step by step through. And I'll just say, say you're working with a basketball team, you're working with a player, and now you're going to talk to them. Can you walk us through your thought process as you're going to talk to them, whether it's about their training data or just call it player development? Walk
yeah.
us through that step again.
Yeah, so when I get an athlete, the first thing is like get to know them. What do you do? How's school? What do you do? How's your program? Where do you come from? But then also start picking up on social cues. How they interact with me. That's number one. How they interact with me. What kind of program they're in the school. Because sometimes that gets overseen. It's like they think that the kid might be just on a regular program as an athlete, but it might end up that he's not. It might end up that he's on a program where he's getting extra help for math. He might be getting counseling. He might be on a different program that they're not even in school or they're homeschool. So like a lot of stuff going to play from that, and then you start seeing the personality, and from there you can see how the person is more coachable. Another thing that sometimes since the few things will come up is like if the parents want to share it, they might be on an IP, they might be on a 504. So sometimes those things will come up, and then you can better assess, especially for the younger guys. You can better assess, like, okay, if that person, or if they, hey, have medication for ADD, ADHD, that happens a lot sometimes, they will share that with me. So now it's like, okay, I know this kid is going to be all over the place. Instruction has to be very simple. They're going to get lost on instruction. So I had to be very, like, thorough, very simple with my coaching, which at first I wanted to be over coaching. Is like, do this, do this, do that, do that, do that, do that. No, no, no. Like, your hand has to be here, your finger has to be there. Like, like, give that value. At first, I thought, as a coach, the more feedback I provided, the more I was coaching. And after that, live and learn. I'm like, you know what? They're young, they're getting it. I'm gonna give the cue, 1 to 2 cues. Now I give a cue, 2 to 3 reps, then I give another one, then I give another one, and then allow them to, like, they're not gonna get hurt if they learning how to do a movement with whatever it is, whether it's with weight, no weight. I just let it happen, and then they're gonna get it. Not only that, now I'm saving more energy, but also they're gonna be able to have, make a mistake, repeat, make a mistake. Okay, I got it. And then we progress that.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches make the mistake early on of trying to show their intelligence by overcoaching. And what
Yes, and
happens,
I was that. I mean, hands up, I was that guy. I was that guy that I took my personal training. I'm like, okay, like, let me see, like, okay, you're good. No, now I'm like, hey, this is what you have to do. Not only that, my English is hard. Like, at first, like, sometimes my kids don't even understand me. If I go to Colombia, I come in even with a thicker accent. If I'm nervous, accent goes up. So then I had to be like, okay, how can a coach not talking a lot? So I was very physical as with my motions, like, if you're gonna hinge, I will just show them. I won't even talk. Do this.
yeah.
It was like, because of the other part too is like, from human development, the younger that you are, the less cues you can be able to perceive. So during the development, we're animals. So when we're learning by watching. Kids learn by watching. You cannot tell a kid, do this. You gotta show them. So then part of, like, of that development is first this, then that, simple steps, and then that will get it a little bit better. And for kids, I don't even correct their form too much when it's bounding. It's like, this is what I want you guys to do. Go try it. Unless I see, like, okay, he's gonna get hurt if he's gonna keep doing it. We regress it. But other than that, I allow them. They're resilient. They're learning, and part of that, they don't have the motor skills just yet developed for these movement patterns. I move it, scale it back, and then now, after a second session, boom, they get it. So that's the one thing that I also, and also the most important part that I talk about is, and then I ask, who do you live with? Very simple question, but that can give you a huge idea what the environment of this athlete might be. Because once, they might be because sports is their passion, parents are supportive, or two, it could be that sports is the escape. So then also, if sports is the escape, you can talk about, you live with mom, you live with dad, they're divorced, you get to, like, you don't get and open a book and you start asking these questions, but that's how you get to know the person. And, like, that's, like, sometimes even for my program, I had to get a tea time. So we created, like, a little tea time, and then I say, hey, guys, you guys have any tea? It's like, oh my God, Jose is like, okay, hold it, get lifting, and coming. Sometimes the teams come furious. It's like, one time I had to snap at one of my athletes because they came in hot about some drama that had happened. It's like, hey, that's not how you're coming here. You're not coming here and swearing. You're disturbing the atmosphere of the group. You're gonna have to hold it. But I know, but it's like, hey, this is not. I know what you're going through. Can't do that. This is not. There's a parent in here. They don't know you. Like, you look like a bad kid right now because of the way you're coming in. You're coming in swearing. That's not what we're doing here. Hold it. Do your program. We'll talk at the end. That ended up being an hour and a half chat at the end of the session. So that's something we're developing is that if they don't feel safe talking to the parents, talk to me, then I can maybe help you deliver that message back home on a way that maybe your parents might take it better, whether it's a good or bad news, or how to communicate the situation. So that's something that we do at our facility, is really getting to know the athlete, which is why when I developed my program, it was more on a small group setting. because I was able to help him. If you have 30 athletes, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're never gonna get to 30 people knowing exactly who they are. And that's what I do. I did the opposite. I individualize my training. We do part of like the technology that we use got us to that, but also we individualize the athlete personally too. We get to know them on that at that level.
Yeah, I think often people forget the taking the time. I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had in the private sector and at the college level where people just open up and you're that sanctuary, you're that resource, you're that sounding board, and how important those call them lifts or those experiences can really shape them. Because as you bring up, you don't know whether they had a good upbringing or a tough one, or if, a different
Oh yeah.
country, or what the family situation is. And I think the best coaches I've ever seen, and I go down the line of people that I've known personally or even just professionally, you've heard about through circles, there's an incredible relationship that then has training. The training is
Yeah,
the
no,
second part.
that's 100%. Like it goes to a point that is happening like not long ago. Um, starting the coaching lifestyle, but sorry, like college, and then we start talking about life. One time we just sat down. We literally mid session, everybody was doing cleans, back squat, sprinting. I was talking to this girl. The other guy came in and like, oh, what are you talking about? Then we ended up like having five people just listening, and I'm like, what, screw this session. I think and but a part of that, for example, for me, I don't drink, I don't smoke. Like I haven't done, I don't know what is being drunk. So that also that part for kids is mind blowing. It's like how did you do it? I do, kind of like fake it until you make it kind of thing, like giving them advice on how did I make it through without segregating myself and isolating myself. Because I tell them, guys, I went out, I hung out, college is an experience as well, but I stood my ground, giving them advice, and they were like, "Oh wow, I didn't know it was possible." Some of the kids like, "I didn't know you could do it." It's like, well, it can be done, but you need like a strong will in order to do that. Or my choices of why I decided not to do it. So is a big aspect and on my program for sure.
Yeah, and for a lot of times you might run into a situation depending on the community you're in. No one's ever told this individual to be great. No one's ever told this, person that they should go to college, that they should, push harder or this, that. And it's interesting because people tend to rise up to their expectations, but often early on, they're not sure if it's okay to be great. They're not
Yeah,
sure how to go about doing it. And then where do I go if I have help or if I have a bad day? And that's where training, you're going to have a bad lift. It happens. You're going to have a
yeah,
bad rep. And we talked earlier on another podcast, maybe that's probably the bigger lesson in sport is how do you handle adversity and failure? How do you work together in a team? Because most likely you're not going to go professional, but so many life lessons, as a man or as a woman can be really brought out in the training environment where we're setting them up to have success, but also push that limit.
yeah, so of course that's number one. So the one thing that I try to set on my program is that the arousal of performance, like trying to be very mellow. I don't like to be like barking at the kids, like because for one, I can be their cheerleaders when they're on the field. You know what I mean? So a lot is also it's time consuming. I don't know, like I give props to the coaches that are, out there yelling in people's faces for 10 sessions a day. I can't do it. It's not like props to those guys, but like that's not my personality. Also, the part of that meme from behavior background, I don't need to be yelling at someone's faces to encourage them because I don't know what the background of them is at home. That's a huge one too, because it's like if they come from like violence at home and I'm here like barking at him, like yelling at him to get done, like yes, he looks cool, like wow, that coach is encouraging, but how is that person taking that? Is that encouragement? Is that intimidation? Is that you setting up your alpha like in the weight room as a coach, and then like and that it's hard. It's really hard to work into. Everybody has their own stories depending on the sport that they play. That's the other part too. Me coming from a background where I only know BMX, but I had great coaches for BMX, and the guy was like that, very good. He barely rose his voice, so I learned that. You know what I mean? I copied the behavior aspect, but the training aspect, that's what I made it my own. Kind of like me coaching right now. My coach for BMX in the US is his name is Tony Hoffman. He was a BMX racer, but this guy had the craziest connections in the world. Carvalli was a good mentor of him. He actually was training with Carmichael Industries, which are huge in the industry for the Tour de France. They train Lance Armstrong. From there, we actually started working on velocity-based training. So me as an athlete, I was working on velocity based training since 2011, no, 2008. That's a while ago. I was like 20 years old, working with VBT. He was able to get a connection with the guys at Push, the Push bands, and we actually, some of our athletes, part of this group, we were actually some of the testing some of the prototypes and testing the glitches and all this stuff. From there, we moved into GymAware, so using GymAware power meters for bicycles through SRAM, like a cycling. So technology was at the pinnacle of how I developed my program. So now going more into like how we train.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting about you is that yes, you use technology, and we're going to get into that to your practice, which is cutting edge, but there is this underlying foundation which you talk about it so easily and so, matter of fact. But I think a lot of young coaches forget that because throughout their time as their development, well, it's my coach, my program, but you spent, the first half hour here kind of talking about, your athletes. And I think that one thing everyone needs to keep in mind is you're in the service industry. You're
Yeah.
here to serve. You're here to help. And that doesn't mean a doormat. That doesn't mean that you should, if a sport coach or if an athlete comes in, and they have an attitude and not acting proper, you should just take it. But you should also set up an environment and culture where people want to come to you to be the best version of themselves. And it sounds easy, but it's hard in practice to do day in and day out. But it sounds like, you mentioned VBT kind of as you move forward. Can you walk through that, how you use it? Because I know, again, people talk about it being new. But like you said,
Uh,
you've been doing it for a while. And if you go
yeah.
back to the old coaches, they used rattle plates to be able to hear the plates, at about a meter per second, the plates, would rattle. So this isn't a new concept, even though it might be new in the social media aspects of people talking about it. Could you tell everyone how you used it and then kind of where you see it going?
Yeah, so pretty much, I mean, the way that we used it, I mean, back in the day, like when I was training for BMX, it was one of the agreements that I had to do in order to train with this coach. Was like, hey, if you want to work with me, you gotta get these systems. It's like, GymAware was like 3 grand. Like, you give me a whole bunch of different prices, and then the push band was like $200. And then we got the first version hooked up for like $80, $100, something like that. And then in order to provide the data for them, but then part of that was the auto regulation was huge because now we weren't. I was a big meathead because on those 2 years that I stopped as an athlete, I got big. I was like the guy of like bench pressing 300, um, like regular average meathead, 400 squat, 500 deadlifts and stuff like that. But then part of that is like, okay, let's go back into an athlete. So the deal with the coach was that I had to get devices for tracking because that's the only way he was gonna know that it was gonna get better. But also the other part of that is the auto regulation and then CNX taxing. So that was huge because the way that he was training, loads could be very heavy. So we had to get on a deload. So we will be like three on, one off, 4 on, one off, stuff like that. But it made me realize how much and how overtrained some athletes can be because what happens, number one, overtraining is a very sensitive subject, very hard to catch back then. Now is much easier to do, but the part two that I learned is that we were how to call it, we were blaming outside sources for our condition but not necessarily what we were doing. So for example, for me it was huge that every 3 to 4 weeks I started to get a mild cold. I will go um, up the stairs, 2 floors. I was gassed. My legs, I will like be standing. My legs were throbbing. So now when I started talking to the coach, like, this is how I'm feeling. Is like, hey, listen, watch out because your CNS is taxed. You're like, now you get into the CNS, you're taxed. I will go to races, and then we were like sometimes like like a 1, 2, 3 priority on the list. We're like number 3 priority is the worst, like a regional, national, stuff like that. And I'll go to races. Day one, killed it by miles, leg speed, top notch. And I was amazing. I did really well that race. Next day, that was the like, okay, this is it. This is what overtraining is. Then the next day, I got hit by a train. I couldn't get up on my bed. My whole body was like hurting. I couldn't warm up properly. So it's like, okay, so this is what our training is. I call my coach. It's like, okay, take a week off. You're done. We gotta reevaluate where you're at and go. We do like a readiness assessment too, like with CMJ, just to see where we will be at. So then after that, kind of what it got me into now coaching. I was doing personal training on the side as well for the YMCA. Yeah,
Yeah, I just want a quick question on that because you covered so much there. The
I took a
off
lot
the
of that.
off the VBT, you talk about CNS taxing. I want you to explain to me, kind of, say I was a young coach and I was in an internship with you, and I have an athlete. You say go run VBT. Can you kind of explain to me what protocol or what approach you would use the VBT to find that CNS taxing? And then after that, you just mentioned the using the vertical jump height as part of your readiness. Could you explain that as well? But I want to almost at a manual level. So someone who's hearing, yeah, I know VBT.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but what protocol would you run? How would you use that?
Yeah, so the way I will do it back then compared to what we're doing now. So what we do it back then for like my readiness test was I had to get the same protocol for warm up. So it had to be consistently the same. So I had to be on the bike for 5 minutes. I will do foam rolling, quads, the regular foam rolling routine. I will do. I'm trying to think. I'll get on the push. I will attach it, and I will have to do the average height of 3 cmjs. I think it was three. I can't remember right now, but it was 3 cmjs. That the number that I got for my height, I will have to compare it to the average of my heights on per session. So if it was anything above 15 deficit, like 15% deficit, then that will be a red flag.
And that's on height, correct? The
And that will
actual.
be on height. We were keeping it super simple, so we were doing based off height.
Got
Like
it.
we sometimes we use power, and then after that later on we started instead of looking for height, we learned a little bit better, and then we started doing power. So the average peak power of the three jumps.
And
That will be
this was off push or was this off of Vertec?
no, that was a push.
Yeah.
Everything was with push. So yeah, because sometimes with push we learn that the height could be deceiving, depending on where you were it, because that's part of like the biggest problem that we had with it. Is like if there was not a protocol, how to put it, how to hold it, like so now we just did power and then the average peak power of the CMJs.
And how often was that correct? And how often did your coach make a decision? Say, pretend I did that and I got to 12%, or I'm at 10%. So I'm not quite, but I'm getting there. How would your coach use that to then either prescribe the following workout or prescribe the recovery?
Yeah, so pretty much what we will do is if it was if we did that, it was about 20%, like 20% was really bad. And then depending on the day, if I came on the train in the morning, then that for me, for example, if I had a morning session, my number were bad. I wasn't a morning person ever. I just started my first night session started about 2 years ago. Like lifting at 7 a.m. My whole entire life, my peak performance is 6 p.m. Like I could be PRing after a 10-hour job, no problem. But then I go to bed. So it was like it was part of my cycle. So then in the morning my numbers were bad. Mid afternoon they were good. But then anything about 10%, that's fine. That's like just how your day was. Did you do a lot of running? Did you do a lot of walking? I'm a behavior specialist, so sometimes I'm chasing kids. Sometimes I'm doing escorts for kids. Sometimes to the point that I'm restraining, like not a cool subject to talk about, but in some incidents we had to do some restraint for kids that are not being safe. They're harming themselves, so like days like that, I know my numbers were gonna be awful. So I will have like at least an expectation. But you got, I wanna say back then, 80% accuracy. Like if it was 15 and low, 10 and low, I'll just let it be. Anything over 20, I was like, okay, like I'm just gonna chill. I will cut the first thing that I will do, I will cut everything in half. So if I was doubting that I was fatigued, everything, because sometimes I couldn't get in touch with my coach. So just to be safe, I will cut my whole program in half. If I have back squats 4x4, 2x2, or 4x2. So I'll cut the volume of the whole, not the loads, but the volume. I will cut the sets in half. At least I know I'm working 50% of what I should be doing at this time.
I like that as an easy way for coaches to,
It was simple. It was simple, and after realizing what overtraining was, I was able to pick up the flags.
right.
You
And
know,
I think people realize when people write a program, and we joke about programs with a capital P, Drew Hammond put it, is that it's the
yeah,
knowing all program, and if it doesn't work, it's because the athlete didn't do it right. But just what
yeah,
you said
that's
there,
huge. Yep,
athletes have lives, athletes have jobs, people have these backgrounds, and I've asked, and even for us in a college environment, which is pretty controlled, if you have 100 players, it's
cannot
all over the
control.
place.
Yeah, you
You
got.
don't know. So if you don't have a backup plan, just like an emergency room, here's the main medication of squats, here's the backup of maybe a belt squat, and then
Mhm.
here's just a recovery, and we're going to talk and chill. But if you don't have multiple options and you're just going to everybody gets the same, especially now, we have enough technology and enough information to know that's not the best course.
Yeah, and no, not only that, the best part, and this is actually that was the best auto regulation that I had in order to avoid overtraining, because well, and I actually forgot that part is that I didn't. Sometimes I didn't even have to do the testing because if we're using velocity based training, we're no longer using percentages. We're using velocities. So the thing is, regardless of what my state physical of mine is, if I'm working on a 0.65 meters per second average for my left, on a hot day I'm doing 200 pounds, on a bad day I'm doing 180 pounds, you know. But that part like is just the same. My CNS is just as prime to do 65.65 at 200, another station 0.65 at 180. Just that part that you're now not controlling the load, you're not doing the velocity. That was like the best regulation I could do because I felt like crap. That's fine, I would just go do whatever I could do for that velocity.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people mention velocity-based training for high speed and light, but to you just mentioned at 0.65, or we used it at the college, especially for female
Heavy.
athletes, you
Yeah.
would ask them 3 sets of 5, go, and they say, is that, and you'd ask them, is that heavy? Yeah, and you see like a meter per second. Well, that's
Yeah.
not heavy. So we said instead of a percentage, we're going to add 5 pounds. Add 5 pounds. Okay, you're going to now lift. And just like you said, zero point 0.6, zero point 0.7, and you can go down to plus or minus a little at zero point 0.3 meters per second.
Yeah.
That's really heavy. But at zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.7, you're in that kind of 80 percentile band. But if people don't know what heavy is, or again, to your point,
It's a
that is,
perception.
it's the bad day.
The
They get
thing
to
is
now
that so
learn.
the thing is that lifting is a perception internal. You know what feels heavy to me, depending on how I'm wired, might be light to you. So that's the other. That's why percentages are good. They work, get the job done, but the individualization part is hard because, for example, like I said, if I'm working on 80% of my max, which I could move it about 50, 65, 50%. Sorry, 50, 60 to 50 meters per second. But if I was restraining kids and escorting kids, now if I was doing 200, sometimes I'll come and do 150, and I was heavy, but because of the taxing, but it still got the job done. And then now what we do, what I did is that kind of what I lighten up the bulb is the first time I had an athlete. My first athlete, his name is Jake. He went to Babson for hockey. So I used to take care of him at the YMCA, like doing some coordinator programs. And then his dad saw me training. He's like, I want you to teach my kid what you're doing right now for your training. I'm like, yeah, bring him through. And I'm like, oh, that's your son? He's like, yeah. I was like, oh my God, I've been working with this kid since he was in middle school. Now he's in college. So I worked with him, give him a few tips. Then it was like towards school. So then the next season, he goes, hey, Jose, I want you to take care of my strength and conditioning program. You think you can do that? I was like, yeah, how much would you charge me? He's like, I don't know, 20, $15 a session, have no idea. So I was like, and I was doing part of the personal training. So he couldn't about the personal training otherwise. He was like, dude, you know what? Just give me 15 to $15 because it's fun working with you. And then I started utilizing velocity based training with him and kind of the principles, same things that I was learning. And I'm like, oh my God, this kid blew up. Like it was insane. It got so bad that the coach had to ask him if he was taking steroids. And the kid was bullshit. I'm sorry my language, but about it. Because he's like, dude, how can someone ask me that so disrespectfully? Like, Jake, don't worry about it. It's like that is such a like a reward for you. I can't come up with the word, but it's like that somebody that has seen you over the whole school year stopped seeing you for 4 months and they had to go to the resource that you're on steroids, imagine how much you have grown physically and performance wise. That's the only thing that they could come up with. But what he's not, what the coaches doesn't have into mind is like, well, he was training 5 times a week. He was working in construction Monday to Friday. Everybody who works at the team were in the, at their beach houses down in Cape Cod. You were grinding every day. You were putting the work and efficient work. So, for example, the biggest one was cleans. He was doing 4x6, you know, like big, 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 big reps. I was like, listen, cut everything in half, 4x2s, 4x3 with the clusters, and now he went up on everything. So that was the after that, after I saw his performance, like this is it, because that was my first official athlete that I ever had. Everything else was adult personal training because I didn't have the route of how to go to athletics because I didn't understand the system or how it works. I didn't even know that I could go to a college and be a coach for the university. Like that's how much of a mentorship I had, part of like going to school.
That's so cool. I had a similar story in back in the day in Newport where we had an individual, same thing, is 16 years old and training everything, did everything perfectly. The nutrition dialed in, super excited. And I'll never forget, same thing, he came back, he got accused of steroids. And the other funny part was that he had to show ID at the tournament because when he showed up, because
Like a grown man.
in the picture they had on him, he was like 140 pounds, and he rolled in. He had a growth spurt. He had, I forget how many inches he grew, but he was sitting at like 185 and rocked up. And
Yeah,
same thing. It's just it's a testament to every little thing. I mean, he was almost too much dialed in, where he was weighing his food, didn't do anything but like eat, sleep, and train. And I
yeah.
just
It
think
took it
that
like to the point, to extreme. Yeah,
yeah, and we dial it back, but again, to your thing is that it's very empowering to know that you can make such changes, and especially, you talk to any guy, we all wish we could go back to teenage years, and with the teenagers, they don't know that that is a time you are setting your genetics and your body up for life, and so
yeah,
commitment, prior to the age of 18, when they're ready, when they get the bug, that they can go and make tremendous changes that last their entire life. So that's pretty cool. And you started with him, but now kind of can you walk through with your practice what you're doing now? Because again, you mentioned VBT, you mentioned push. I know you use a ton of our plates in your programming. Can you kind of give us an outline of kind of what the state of your program is now?
yeah. So like now, 2022, with progress of how we do our programming. Actually, now what we use with the force plates, now we utilize them for readiness. Especially in season, and then or if they come after practice. So now we're able to see where they stand, whether it's the pogo jumps that we use, whether it's the CMJ. We compare it based on the average, and then now what we've been able to do is the connection with mind and body. So the biggest improvement that we've done in that is that now we have kids coming in with drama, with load. Now we're seeing it during like test weeks, finals. The first thing that I do if they come in with drama, stuff like that, or if I see them that they're like low motivation, is like, hey, listen, warm up, get on the force plates, do counter movement jump, let me know. They come in, they do that, 15, 20, up to 30%. I'm like, oh my God. I was like, all right, listen, go to your program, let's do upper body, let's do mobility, call it quits. Um, so then we do that all the time. So it's like, oh, okay. So I guess I was feeling that way. Sometimes they come with drama, they come same scenario, they come in, they got a PR. Like we're talking about 10, 15 PR of their average height. And I'm like, whoa, all right. Whatever you had going on, throw it out the window, go grab it. Sometimes during if it's like more than 10%, I'll let them do like a 3 rep PR on trap bar. Usually trap bar is the safest. So it's like go get a trap bar PR for 3. Let's see if it could be your previous, on a given day. Now they change that. Oh, I can lift heavy. Boom, goes out the window. Then what happened with that is now they start to get the mind to body connection as, okay, I feel like that, but not necessarily means this. It's like, okay, I have a lot of stress going on, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna have a bad lifting session. And now I come kids of the doors like, Jose, I want to get a PR. I'm ready. Like I feel so strong. I get it. It's like, okay, calm down, dude. It's like, can I please lift? Can I do like bench press, like any PR, any sort of back squat, deadlift, whatever it is, cleans. And I'm like, okay, calm down. Go to the force plates. Let's see what we got. Man, 20, 30%. Yeah. So 20, 30% PRs. And then I'm like, okay, good. What do you want to lift today? Do you have, do you have an event of season? It's like, okay, Go ahead, go knock yourself out, pick a lift, 3 reps. I don't do maxes, like 1 rep maxes. I do more like I like to do cluster sets. Do as many clusters as you can for 3 reps, and then after that, we'll get a PR, but then also done 10 sets. So it's like if they can get a PR for three, sometimes one kid, remember, for bar, he just took it very slowly. He ended up doing 15 sets of three until he got a PR, and he did a PR of over 50 pounds from his previous one. So if you dial that up and you do a 5-3-2, what is it, 5-3-3-1, like this dude will be lifting like 200 pounds more, and that's good because like I like my guys to be consistently stronger, not one time strong. Because I think that's gold standard for me. It is, I don't care how much you lift, just move it as fast as you can every single time.
Could you
And
explain that to someone though? Because that repeated strength in the bands and the recruitment area that you're talking about, I think you have to do it with caution. Your point there that you went slowly up is super important because we see often, whether it's 3 reps, 1 rep, don't care. If you overshoot that, it's a razor's edge of the overtraining. And what was a positive situation is could be negative, but you have a system here set up where you're gradually moving them through these different sets. How do you do that, say, again, with someone who says that they feel really good and they feel great, but they have another event, say, in a week? Would you let them go for it or would you cap
yeah,
them?
so exactly. So for example, and that's why I say, where are you in the program? Like, are we off season, preseason, or in season? So usually I do that during summer and off season, and then if I mean the percentage has to be really really high in order to tax it, to like target it. So like say 15-20% above their average height. So then I'll be, if it's off season, do as many sets as it takes you until you find your weight. So I walk away, I'm working with all the athletes. Hey, where are you at? He's like, how many sets is that? He's like, I don't know. I did like 5 warm-ups. I'm like, okay. So load it up a little bit. So sometimes they start too slow. Like they start with 45s on one side, they add 10, 10, 10, 10. My rule is don't add more than 20 pounds at a time during those working sets. So that's the number one, the number one thing. And then usually what I do, my gold one is 5 by 3. You got 5 sets, work up, so it's like, oh, what do I start with? It's like, okay, let's go to the app. We use Team Builder. Go to the app, look up for trap bar, see what you're lifting for those, start, like, go to the data where it says what loads you're lifting for 5 reps, make that your warm-ups, and then we start from there. Some other kids, they just can't find it, like they, after the 5 sets, like, Jose, I think I can do more. And then now I'm looking for form. I'm looking that there's no deterioration. If we have the velocity based training, any devices, then we'll put them on, and then we keep them 5 by 3 as long as your threshold of speed doesn't drop too much. So like, let's say for trap bar, if it's about 30, now you're pushing it. If you're about 40, now you're doing good. To 20s, that's a 1 rep max. So if they get to lift it like that, and if they do like a 20, they're doing 3 reps, they're more likely some sort of your form is not really good. So then it's like, okay, form is off, and that will be the only lower body program we will be doing that day, and we'll move to something else. But doesn't happen often.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned earlier in the podcast about letting them go, don't overcoach them. And I've had people say similar things to me where, aren't you afraid they're going to get hurt? Well, in those unloaded times, in those teaching times, and that's really, you have movements when it's a teaching phase where they're figuring it out, and an 80-20 rule, right? Like it doesn't have to be perfect, but they're not going to hurt themselves, but you're letting them figure it out. But when you get into the events that you're talking about now, it's almost the opposite where they have good technique, but now they're just getting fatigued and form starts to go and they've been programmed not to quit. They're not necessarily going to bail out. And so as a young coach, sometimes in the moment you say, okay, good, one more set. And then when you get into that one more, but the knees are
Yeah,
coming in, the back's starting around. So that's the
exactly.
dichotomy of the teaching versus the maximal effort. But the individuals have spent months now learning the technique to get it to the point where they can do one of these heavy triples. And I think that's super
Yeah.
important.
And so that's the other time. I won't do that and that's the other part. I won't do this system for somebody who's been with me for a month. Like if I'm doing this with someone, I'm doing it with someone who's been for me for 1 year, 2 years, like of consistently coming. And so that's about it. Like, that's the other part. This is more like an incentive for advanced athletes, not for a beginner program. If I see, and this is the other part, if I see that someone is PRing on their jumps, are more likely pull out the sprints, the timers, and we do sprints. So that's if you're young, we go do sprints. If you're older, we could do a lift, or we could do both. Hey, let's see if your timings are good. And the other part too, like part of like the assessments that we did with the force plates. Now we work with over 20 different sports. So now what we do is we're able now to categorize athletes by sport, and then now we can see where the deficits are or what they need to work on, and that's now where we're now not only using BVT system, but we're also individualizing the training based on the sport that they play, whether it's through the reactive components or the strength components as well.
I was going to ask you, I love that idea of earning the opportunity to give a maximal effort with the younger kids, sprinting, jumping,
Yeah.
older individuals, major compound lifts. But I was also going to ask you, this summer I had a chance to work with a group of athletes, see them test on the plates. They got stronger. Their outputs got higher. So they were jumping higher. They were getting stronger, but their strategies really changed. And, most of my career has been kind of at the higher end high school, college level, but working with the middle school to younger high school population, what do you see for variation in strategies? And again, for those who don't know what we're talking about, you can check out on our blog the ODS blog post where we talk about these things of output, how high, how fast, but then the strategy, really looking at, okay, yes, you jump higher, but your landing is now asymmetrical by 20% and super, super hard, heavy feet. Continuing to get that person to jump higher looks like you're doing better, but you're actually shortening the longevity. So we always have a longevity and then an output kind of XY paradigm that we have to keep in balance. And the plates certainly do that. What have you seen on strategy changes on people that are changing in both their strength, but also just maturing in the high school level?
No, so pretty much the number one thing that with all this system is self-awareness. Because the thing is that I could tell an individual how to do a million things, but it's never gonna change because what I feel is not, like I said before, what I feel is not what you feel. So now being able to have the feedback of if you do this technique, you get this. When you land stick landing, like you don't go into a hinge, there's not a deceleration portion, soft landing per se. This is what it looks like. So I also talk to the guys as well and the girls, everybody. I really make it. I spend a lot of time breaking down what we're looking at because think kids don't care, first of all, but sometimes they don't want to understand what they're looking at. They're just like, okay, it's good, it's bad. I do the opposite. I like to make sure that I explain exactly what my expectations are for all the data that we're looking at, to the point that now I'm walking away. I'm letting them manage the testing, but then now we're looking at very specific things when it comes with the strategy. So number one thing, if it's the landing, the landing is bigger than the takeoff, the force that you apply to takeoff, now that's a very stiff landing. So I make him look at, listen, this is the peak where you push off. This is the peak where you landed. This is way too high. Think about it, that there's kids in the first floor. You don't want to wake them up. How would you do that? So something like that, because again, it's unnecessary stress that we're putting. And then when I see kids doing that during testing day, like when they're new, first conversation that I said is like, hey, have you had any issues with your knees? Oscars, I can say that word. Like, have you been diagnosed with this? Do you see yourself like having, patella tendinopathy, of any? It's like, no, I'm not really. Other kids like, oh yeah, actually right here hurts, and I'm like, that could be one of the, they're very knee dominant, they're not hinging enough. Let the strategy change, but the number one thing is, what I've seen for the younger ones with the kids is, kids learn by doing, but feedback is number one. So positive reinforcement. So that's part of why the behavior comes into play for everything. People just don't realize it. So reinforcement makes goes a long run. So whether you gotta make like for reinforcement, you gotta pick the behavior that you want to desire, and you gotta provide feedback that gets you there. So sometimes you might be putting your energy on things that the athlete might develop into being scared of doing rather than courage of doing. So whenever I see a jump, I say, do that jump, fine. Then I look at it, it's like, listen, if you do this, this, and that, I give him like for what has worked for me is the braking, the percentage of how the braking to propulsive, the percentage that you spend on each phase. That has been golden for me. It might not work for other coaches, but that's how I modify the jump. So I was like, hey, listen, look, you're spending 30% on the braking, you're spending 40% on the propulsive. The braking has to be at least half, should be at least half of the propulsive. So how do I do that? Drop quick, jump up, push off your toes. That's it. But that's the feedback that I did. Let's see what happens. Boom, they do it. Now the braking rate of force development is twice as big. Now the percentages is like 25 to 35, or like we go from 30, 30, 30 or 30, 40 to like 25, 37. Now the take velocity went up, height went up. So it's like, how did that feel like? It's like, yeah, that actually feel good. Another thing is what I do is like, listen, and I do that with everybody. It's like, I'm you, you're the ground. Don't go like this. Boom. That's what you do when you drop. And I'm like, oh, it's like, yeah, you're like, when you're falling, you're pushing away at the same time. And that's what the ground wants to feel when you do it. You're doing this, and then you push. So now they get that. It's like, okay. And after that, then after they do a jump, the line is like, oh, that wasn't a good one. Result comes, it wasn't a good one. And that took 3 reps to put the mind to body connection. If I do this strategy, I feel this way, I get this outcome. So that's one of the number one things that we teach is how do you feel? Sometimes the kids don't even know. But because of we use these strategies and these numbers, now they know if I do this, my desired outcome is that. Therefore, it's a positive reinforcement. The biggest one, especially for sprinting, is when you sprint and you're not timing it, you might get caught up as a coach, do one more rep, do one more rep. That doesn't look good. Sometimes when you ask the athlete, hey, was that fast? Like, no, that felt like crap. I felt awful. If there's not a device that can tell you exactly what you got, then what happened is you do a sprint, and the first thing I ask, how did you feel? It's like, nah, that was awful. I felt that was not good. It was a PR. So what happened there? That's now the reinforcement of the outcome. So if I get a certain outcome and it's then not a reinforcement, I'm now making a negative because it didn't look familiar to what I usually do. But what could happen is that you might have done certain mechanics change that allowed you to actually get a better rep or better time, but you didn't know, and now that became a negative. So now when they get a PR, and I know it's a PR, I ask them how did you feel. 90% of the time, I know they tell me that it didn't feel good. I'm like, that's a PR. Careful how you think about it. I want you to replicate what you just felt. Boom, matching PR or like 2% lower. But that 2% lower is better than the average. So that's how we play with it, and we don't do a lot of reps as well.
I was going to ask you that though, when we think about shaping of behaviors, and again, both from a personal training standpoint, I also, again, for hobbies, work with dog and canine training. We do actually talk about that moment that there is a change in the strategy or change in the mechanic to reinforce that. And I think that with coaches, that might be a really important thing to point out of missing that opportunity to reinforce that. You're actually slowing yourself down. So yes, the strategy felt different. That's what you felt. It didn't feel good or didn't perceive, your perception is it didn't feel good. But in actuality, they've changed their strategy to get a better outcome. That's a really great point that if, you're sitting there listening, are you spending time chasing feeling good, or are you binding that feeling good to get
And
your
that's the
outcome?
number one thing that I do. So the other part too, now that we do is that if we don't have a timing system, now we work with video analysis. So now we're working, okay, now we're working on sprinting mechanics. So it's very hard to know how you feel. When you're running 10, 15 miles per hour. So now we break down the videos, and now we work into kilograms, slow-mo, frontside mechanics, touchdown, toe off, how do you look? And then we show it to the kids. Listen, this is what I'm trying to do, but look at what you're doing. And that's the number one. That's why video feedback is huge for any program. If you don't have a velocity based training, like you could see it, it's like, oh, I look slow. Like, yes, it has to be faster than that. Or like, oh,
What program do you use for that? Just for people listening, because video used to be expensive, and I know there's a bunch of different apps, and then what is it,
oh,
Canovea has stuff.
the ones that I've been playing around with on form, it's actually come up pretty good. So on form is one which I think when you put coaches out on form comes up. At least that's what happened with me. So I use that. I think Les Spellman also used that one as well. I've used it in the past to communicate with the coach with the athletes as well. So that one is pretty good. And then for kilograms, I use the Runomatic, the Runomatic app. That's actually been pretty good, very helpful. But if I'm on the go, slow mo, you know. Sometimes I use the kids. My phone right now, I need to get a new one. So it's like, hey guys, let me see your phone. Sometimes the white lens, boom, get it on. Hey, listen, this is what I want you to do, and let's see if we can make it happen. So it's just simple. I try to not to complicate it too much on that sense. But if I want to really break it down, definitely Runomatic and OnForm is the ones I use for that.
Do you think that that is something that every practitioner needs to have in today's environment, and kind of going without it is a disadvantage? Or do you think there's some merit to kind of what you would call old school, kind of just hands-on coaching without really tremendous amounts of feedback?
So
Don't
it is a
overthink it.
balance. It's a balance because if there's one thing that I've learned, and what happens a lot is that people become a one. Like this come like a cult in a way. Like I only use this, I only use that. This is the system that I use. This is how I train. But it's a combination of everything. But at first you become obsessed. Like okay, I spent thousands of dollars on this, so I'm only gonna use that. But it doesn't work that way. Like sometimes it happens days like crap, I have force plates. I was like, hey guys, let's use them. So but one thing that I've learned is, and kind of what it got me to the place that I'm at, is how to utilize certain tool for a deficit that I have in my coaching. So at one point some system becomes too problematic as way too many steps to take with every athlete, so it becomes a more like a one-on-one environment. So then I have to be like, you know what, we're gonna have to do this on a one-on-one because it's gonna take a long time. So especially for like the running stuff has to be small groups. Big groups doesn't work too well. One thing that I had to learn how to manage was if I'm doing force plate analysis, how do I do it with a big group? So because I was spending like 10 minutes on one athlete on coaching them up. So now again, I was a little bit over coaching with the force plate, but I was like, okay, I cannot assess 10 people if I'm doing all this. So I had to learn also how to do that very simplistic, so I can start working with bigger groups, especially for assessments. So that's huge.
Yeah, you're one of the customers that actually uses this both on a high speed environment for almost a combine or baselining approach. So lots and lots of bodies in an hour. And then also you do some of the deep dives. How does your coaching, or how does your, I don't know, the logistics of those two different environments play out in your mind when you think about, oh, I got to test 1,000 people in a day or 2 days versus, oh, I'm going to do a serious analysis on this individual who just is coming back from an ACL. How do you approach those two problems
Yeah.
differently?
So if we go to, and I've seen that as well, a great tool for rehab after rehab. That's been one of the best tools that I probably could have had at the moment. But then the main thing that we do is like, okay, if I have somebody who's hurt, hey, come in 30 minutes before a session, or let's pick up an extra day where it's only you and I. Or go do your jumps. Probably the kid more likely has came to me before. So, hey, listen, go do these jumps. I'll walk you through it. I'll spend 10 minutes doing all the testing. I'm gonna look at it at home, and then I'll present the information to you of what I saw. So those are the two scenarios. Come with me, so we are on a one-on-one. But usually all I do is like for rehab and stuff, like coming back from rehab, I was like, let's do all the testing. Let's see what happens. What we once we do everything, and we just gather all the data and we just present it at once. So like that, we're not looking like one by one by one, a metric by metric. Like just get it all done with, and then we see what we get overall as a profiling. Then I had to learn how to test 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids. This summer, I think the biggest group that I tested at once was 48. I think it was 48. Um, Let me see. No, it was 45. It was 45. So then what I had to do is I use also GPS systems. Started using it this summer. So that was my next addition. I wanted it to work. incorporating more like speed development programs, and then also how to assess that. So I invested on some GPS trackings and work with McLeod. So those are amazing too. So now we can create athletic profiles for movement up in the field and also the athletic performance of movement in the gym. So we're combining those and creating a profile overall for the athletes. So this summer I did a speed program. We had about, I think it was 45 kids that we had. So I only had 5 GPSs, which that was the hardest part. How can I assess 45 kids with 5 GPSs? So what I had to do is that I divided those athletes into 5 GPA, like, so I had to make groups of 5. So what I did is that I did like a circuit. So I did a circuit, so one will lead to another one. So pretty much I did like a mobility station, 90-90 station, very little taxing movement. So I had stations, 5 athletes per station, and then I had a mobility station. I even had a, before force plates, I had a spike ball tournament. So I had 2 spike balls for like little first to 5 points. So like warming them up, then we'll move into force plates. On force plates, we're assessing. That's the other part too. For programs like that, you cannot do too many different assessments. It's gonna take too long. So uh, we did two CMJs, arm on waist, and we did 2 pogo jumps. So like I think they call it the 10-5. So 10 jumps, and then from there they will come to me to the GPS tracking, and then we were assessing max velocity to 40 yards, and then we just get into a circle. So
Yeah.
I'll just make sure everybody came through, and then if your first station was I left the GPS open, so the first station will be a force plate, and then they will come to the sprinting after that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're using the GPS in that environment, almost like laser timing. I think a lot of people think of GPS as in game, you wear it for a full practice, but you're actually just swapping the pucks in and out at a given station. So when we talk about those rotation or kind of a spinning circuit format, that's an interesting way to.
Yeah, so they're also the number one thing that helps if you want to have a successful with testing big groups. You must have them in the system already. If you don't have it in the system, I said game over. Like it cannot be done. So the number one thing I suggest is you need to have everybody who you're testing into the system already. So the flow of the session is much easier. Another thing that we do is that we went to actually Phillips Academy, and then we help them with their assessment as well. So now they're, oh my God, we did all the full sports, I believe. So there we go. So then, for example, at Phillips Academy, Drake hit me up and asked me if I could go down and help the guys, Nicole, Sean, with some of the testing for the full sports. So then, while we did the case, there was a little bit trickier because we had about 30 to 45 minutes per team. So that at that sense, again, number one, you gotta have everybody in the system uh, before the session. And then the one thing that we did, we were super efficient with it. We had 2 force plates, and then the team, Nicole and Sean, um, warmed up the teams, and then we divided into 2 groups. From those 2 groups, I did a little chat of one, like 2 minutes. What am I looking for? How come we're using this technology? Because that's number one. You need to explain it in a very non-scientific way of why we're using them. Because again, kids will do it for the sake of doing it because everybody else does it and the coach asks. But I think when you spend just 2 minutes about what's going on and why we're doing it, it might change the perception of, oh, this is lame or this is stupid, like any of that, because the kids might be not feeling it, but it was like, okay, wait, maybe there's a purpose for it. So then after that, I tell them, what I'm looking for, how the device works, when it blinks, jump, land, soft landing, and that's that, or you're gonna have 3 tries. And then we divide into 2 groups. I had like, let's say, letter A through H alphabetical order, and then they get the other crew. So we did it alphabetical order, half and half. They came to me. I think it was my first time we did it, and then we just did it. So then it was actually very efficient. And then on that, I didn't do a lot of cues. Just very simple. Unless the kids were like all over the place, it's like, hey, arms on your waist, drop quick, push up even faster, land. And then what we did also is one of the assistants, she goes to Merrimack, Carson. So then she was with me. So I was able to see that there were a lot of kids with the asymmetry was way off during the breaking. So then, as soon as the king come in, I will see it. It's like, can you flag this athlete? Because we had a list as well. Just flag this athlete. I would tell him, hey, listen, I want to talk to you at the end. It's like, I saw something, but I want to ask you about it. It's like, don't worry about it, just go. So then we got everybody said that when we brought the other kids in, it's like, hey, listen, have you had any injuries? Have you had this, and that? And I think most of the kids that we talked to, they have had underlying conditions of pre-injuries that were going through stuff. It's like, okay, just talk to your coaches because that breaking, left to right is a little bit too big, more that I will personally would like. So maybe take a look at it, see what you guys can do about it. So then that also informing, and then after that for them, they were like, "Oh my God, this is witchcraft! How did you know that?" Because some kids also, some of them were like, they knew it was there, but they didn't think it would pop out on something like that, and it did. So at least it was an eye opener of how in depth, and that's buy-in right there. With those three athletes that you got like that, they buy in into the system right away, and it became competitive. So now everybody's watching, they're bash talking, let me see what you got. Like, and that's also how you bring the team together. Everybody sees where they're at, and then they can see how high they can jump, they can see what they can do. And now it changes the atmosphere a little bit better. That's what we did with my program as well.
I think people don't understand force plates have been around for quite a long time, but when you look at from the initial kind of, foundations of dynamometry in the 80s to present day, how do you make it fun? And so we spend a lot of time on that. And you mentioned it sounds like you tested a lot of people, you implemented a lot of data, on the back end, but you were able to do it in a timely manner that more importantly helped the culture. It helped the environment. And that's really one of the most important things is that if you're doing testing, there's a different feel. It's not necessarily competition. They might actually, you know, be a little bit scared. Oh, how did I do on the test? Versus I'm going to give a maximum effort. And actually, good or bad isn't the number you get. It's did you give a maximal effort or not? And I think that that's super important that any kind of testing that you do be blended into your paradigm and your culture.
Yeah, so that's the number one thing. Is like the one thing that I don't like to, and my the girl, I don't like to bash. Between the kids, that it's okay, but don't be putting someone down. Like that's the when I see it, it's like, guys, I know you know each other, but you can have that language here. Do it on your sport. That might be the culture of the team, but like just not here. You know what I mean? Like I don't want you guys to, for the new kid that is maybe be intimidated by that. But also we do. I do it as well. I love to get in there and be competitive as much as I can and try to like, hey, get on my level. You know what I mean? So it's like if we do it fun, but not to a point that we're downing. Like you don't want to bring someone down. That's the number one thing that I talk with my program. All the kids are shy. They don't want to test. They don't want to do big groups. But I was like, don't worry about it. Just do what you do, and then we're done. Uh, One thing that has been huge for us is the um, mid-thigh pull. We changed that to a belt ISO, and that's huge. That's our new 1 rep max. When somebody's back squatting, I don't longer push for like max lifts. I just put people through the ISO belt, and that has been huge and much better for me. The way to just to see a progress, and then that's actually the way that I explain it is, um, you might be able to lift a lot of weight, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to apply that force. You're very good at moving heavy things slow. Another part too is that there might be some mechanical input into that of your form that maybe might not allow you that might allow you to get that weight, but doesn't mean it's efficient. So then when I talk to them, is like, what does this mean? Is that this is the force that you possess, this is the force that you could go on the field, and that's what you could use on your favor. You lifting 500 pounds might not help you, but you put in 4,000, 5,000 newtons in 3 seconds, 40 seconds might help you more. So a good example of that is that I had an athlete. Oh my god, I can't remember. He's a D line or O line. Can't remember right now, but he put 8,000 newtons. That's a lot on the belt. That's a PR for us. But this kid, if you see him, he's 260, 280. You might imagine like, oh, this guy can lift a house. He couldn't. He hated how weight felt on him. He didn't like the feeling of heavy lifting, so he didn't want to get hurt. He was super afraid of getting hurt. for lifting. So then what we did is now we utilize velocity-based training with this athlete. So his lift were in about 400, his deadlifts were in about 400, his cleans were about like 180, but that's about it. But he was moving like, I think the last one it was 305 for like 0.80. That's a lot.
Yeah, and I think that,
Yeah.
people have heard me say this for years is that just from the data that I've seen, and both in a practical setting, but also from a research standpoint, really, yeah, right around double body weight on a back squat, you start getting that conversation of diminishing returns as it relates to top end speed and power. And so our paradigm was always squat double, but then I want to see what is your ability at a meter per second. And sometimes, if you draw that curve almost like a transmission, that meter per second only can occur at about 10% of that max. And any
Yeah.
researcher would tell you, well, that's not good. Well, yeah, I have a pickup truck, I need a Ferrari. So we would look at what the velocity was at 60% of max and then at
Mhm.
30% of max. And throughout time, as we go to bend, regardless of my strength, you only have a certain amount of contact time to apply force. So if that force, you're, only using 10% of your total force, if that window has passed, it's irrelevant. And so
Yeah.
really being able to bend the transmission, bend those curves. And again, yes, you need strength, but to what point? And then knowing your position. Are you a high velocity athlete, or are you in a
Exactly.
position where you have to lock and engage for an extended period of time and push through? To your point about the repeated strength, suddenly the 4 by 10 at 80 becomes a lot more indicative to your on-field success, as it relates to performance.
Yeah, so then, for example, this guy was kind of a prototype of like how to build my system for big guys like that. Because for big guys to lift heavy weights is so hard as well. Like someone who's 300 pounds to move 300 pounds, it takes a lot. It's hard as well. But then what we did with these athletes were for work on form, let the weight come through, and a lot of learning how to move. Like the number one thing on my program is I don't care how much you lift, I care how well you move. And not necessarily even with the weights. I don't care about the weights. I care about movement quality, bounding, jumping, sprinting, pogo jumps. That's now how that my number one assessment is that can you bound? Can you jump? How's your sprint? That's it. That can tell me a lot about the athlete and how they perform out there, and how well can they produce force and how well they can change direction. So, for example, this athlete, 8,000 newtons. CMJ, I think is about 50.50 meters. Like again, if you're like I think it was 6'1", 280 pounds, and you're jumping a 50, that's good. That's really good.
For those people that are in inches, what are we talking about for that? Because I know, especially in the football community, we're talking about the, vertical jumps, for the linemen in the mid to high 20s, for the semis in the high 20s, mid 30s, and then with our DBs being closer to 40 inches. On some of those numbers that you're seeing, what are they in inches?
So, for example, in force plates numbers, 50 centimeters will be about 19 inches. To put it into perspective as well, for example, for me, my approach jump on a vertical will be about 34 inches,
Hmm.
but then standing on the force plate is about 0.68, 70. So that's kind of like how I make that comparison. And the number one thing, these two you cannot compare. You cannot compare force plate data to like reach vertical. Those are two different techniques, two different way of testing. So those are the you only gotta compare apples to apples. You cannot compare a system where you reach overhead where you might have more extension, and then the way that the force plates. So the kids are very good at that, and then we don't compare them because they might be from programs, especially football. They come to tryouts. It's like don't compare them, just know they're there. You know, like if you get a vertical here, don't come here thinking that's bad. If you do mine, don't think that you're underperform. Just know that that's it. But because now we have a lot of data that we're able to see. Well, if you have a CMJ, if your pogo jump is that, now we're doing a lot of correlation from jumping momentum to sprint momentum. So if we can improve jumping momentum of an athlete on a CMJ, now there's the correlation. I run it for my program is 0.90 something, um, of of if you improve the jumping momentum, that will improve sprinting momentum.
Yeah, and I
And
think that you bring up an important point of education. And I would have individuals that would come to me. I have a 40-inch vertical jump on a yellow mat. And then on the Vertec, it might be 36. And then, as you mentioned with force plates, and I think even people need to know, jumping with your hands on your hip versus using your arms on arm swing, those are two completely different families of movement because
Yeah,
some
and
are loading and coordination. So teaching your athletes that just as you would do for that bench press, hey, I want you at this range, you would teach them different for an incline or you would teach them different for a decline, but all of them have significance. So any tool or any number that you give an athlete, before you start spitting numbers at them, give them context.
oh
Give
no, like if I have
them
anything that
that.
I'm on, my content is huge. Like I really try to educate the kids to a point that one of like these two group of girls that I work with, they actually wanted to do their physics project based on the force plates, which it was called, it was like a little drop jump. What happens when you start raising the height of the drop jump? What happens to your body? What happens with the numbers and all this stuff? So they did that, and that's how much I try to like teach him about what happens in there. The other part too, kids are graphic as well, like they like to see. So another thing that I do is that I show them the figure because it's also a pattern, like certain patterns leave clues as well as data. You know, certain movement patterns are gonna leave clues, and then when we start seeing is if you do arm swing, if you go more like a little spike then back down, then that means that you really didn't break, and then you also weren't being efficient with your arm swing. Now, if you go and start seeing the M, now you can see the arm swing how well you're developing. Sometimes you have a guy, you go flat, spike, down, and then the M. So then now the timing of the arms wasn't efficient when you dropped and then when you swing. So what happened is you drop, as you drop, the arms swing back. So you actually cleared it downward and upward force. So when those arms swing back, the force goes up again and then you go back up. So also how to time the arms down and up to be more efficient with it. And you can see the braking minimizing because when you come down, your arms go up, that's actually holding you on the ground. So we talk a lot about it, and it's simple cues like look at, you got the M or you didn't get the M. If you didn't get the M, make it better. Same thing on the, and usually the force time curve, you could see it with beginner athletes and more experienced athlete. The beginner athlete is going to look like this during the braking phase to propulsive. When the more experienced athlete is boom, is a double, is either a step up, a quick step up, or a sharp to down. So very hard braking to propulsive, and then the push up. So now you can see how well these athletes just on day one, how well can they manage their body. And some of them, it looks like a mountain. Is like, okay, this kid got a lot of work to do, you know.
Yeah.
So then,
And you said though the kids are very visual. They'll look at it and almost like a video game, they'll start coaching themselves and start playing around. And I always encourage those environments where they can sit and play, try to figure it out themselves. Because again, they're not going to get hurt on it. But again, it's
mhm.
going to teach them what to do. And I think your point here on the, oh, if I can get the momentum up, that goes over to my sprint mechanics. I'm seeing a lot of that as well. Asking an individual to get stronger takes time, but like for what? But I know that if I get my momentum to increase, I can then expect speed. Speed lets me get to the ball first. Okay, suddenly now I'm bought into the training that has surrounded this paradigm. So I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, the other part too is that we have to have those tough conversations in a way when the kids are assessing, we see that their body weight is going up after every jump, and then 5, 10%, 2%, 3%. But then we can see is like, okay, this guy, and it doesn't, that's me thinking is like, all right, this guy is 10% on his body weight, but his jumping momentum is actually worse. It's like, okay, hey, try that again. It might be that he moved, the quiet phase wasn't good. Now he did it again, and now he had a better performance. So now he went up 10%, like 3% body weight is going up, but the jumping momentum also went up. So that's a very good indicator that yes, maybe this kid might be gaining weight, but might not be weight where we don't want it or on a weight that we don't want it. Is a way that if this guy is earning is going up by 5%, 10% of body weight, but his jumping momentum is going up, he more likely be muscle quality. He might be getting stronger, therefore he might be acquiring more muscle mass. Or if we see that the body weight is going up a little too much and performance staying steady, then we gotta have those conversations. It's like, hey, how's your diet? What you doing? Because like it seems like you're gaining weight, but your performance is not improving. So let's talk. And then it's actually, I mean, that's how much we will be able to talk and relate with the athletes. That is not like we're body shaming them, but we're making them aware that we know that something is up. They broke up with a boyfriend, girlfriend, a lot of different aspects. Maybe in the opposite, we've had people, maybe they got a boyfriend, they got a girlfriend, now they're going out to each a little bit more often during the week, little stuff like that, more parties. So it's like, okay, so hey, just so you know, this is what's happening. Make sure that your performance in here has to double up, just so we don't get in, like, slow down the road. So
Yeah,
just
and
awareness.
you can get ahead of all that stuff before it becomes, like you said, body shaming or taboo, because
Oh, absolutely.
you're gonna
Yeah,
see it. And I would always tell athletes, I don't care what you do out of here, it's your choice. I hope I motivate you to make good choices, but we would look a lot at power. To your point, if you gain 5 pounds and it's muscle, power goes up. Well, if you gain 5 pounds and power goes down, and again, that's just at the high level. All those other smaller metrics that kind of go into that subsystem, you can catch it. And so it's a great way to use performance as a driver in nutrition rather than just the image stuff. But I mean, I could talk to you all day long. I have so many more questions I want to talk to you. We'll have to come by and swing by and visit you at your facility.
absolutely.
But any of the coaches that are listening that, want to ask more questions or want to reach out, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Honestly, Instagram, catanoperformance.com, or Jose at catanoperformance.com is the simplest way. I'm very active on my social media. So that's a very simple way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, we'll be in touch soon. Have a great rest of your fall and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.